Buck has never talked about this investigation, not in interviews, not on social media, not in any public appearance since the night it happened. The Ames team has faced creatures, physical attacks, and terrain that would have ended most people, and Buck has talked about all of it. The silence around this one investigation is different. It is deliberate, it is maintained, and now it is over. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what Buck just revealed about what the Mountain Monsters team encountered changes everything about what is living in those Appalachian mountains. Jacob Lowe came on to Mountain Monsters as the youngest member of the Ames team, the rookie whose combination of fearlessness and inexperience made him both the most entertaining and the most genuinely useful person in the field during the early seasons of the show. The nickname Buck was earned, not assigned. It came from the way he moved through the Appalachian backcountry, headstrong, direct, without the calculated hesitation that years of fieldwork in dangerous terrain tends to build into experienced outdoorsmen. Where Trapper would assess, where Jeff Headley would research, where Huckleberry and Wild Bill would position and prepare, Buck would go. Into the dark hollow, into the flooded cave, into whatever the investigation had identified as the most active and the most dangerous point in the area, and had consequently decided needed a human presence first. That willingness was not performance. Anyone who has watched enough Mountain Monsters to know the difference between a cast member playing a role and a cast member doing what they would do whether the cameras were running or not, knows that Buck's forward movement in the field is authentic. He is genuinely the person who goes first. Trapper recognized that quality before the show existed, before the Ames team had a camera crew following it through the West Virginia backcountry, back when the three co-founders, Trapper, Jeff Headley, and Willie McQuillian, were building the operation that the television production would eventually document. He brought Buck in because the investigations needed someone whose instinct in the field was advance rather than assess. Across the show's run, Buck grew into something more than the team's forward element. After Trapper's health began declining and the weight of the Ames team's leadership shifted, it was Buck who absorbed the most significant portion of that weight. He became the team's center of gravity in the field in a way that Trapper's illness made necessary and that Buck's development across the prior seasons had made possible. The man who speaks now about the investigation nobody was allowed to see is not the rookie who charged into dark spaces because he did not know better. He is the man who became the team's leader by following Trapper's example long enough to understand what that example was actually teaching. His silence about this investigation until now has been the most deliberate silence in a career that has been defined by the absence of hesitation. Whatever he held back about what the Ames team encountered during that investigation was held back for reasons that the person who has never held anything back in those mountains decided were serious enough to override everything that defines how he operates. Those reasons are what he has now decided the world is ready to hear. The Ames team has investigated creatures across the full stretch of the Appalachian mountain system from West Virginia south through Kentucky, Ohio, and North Carolina, and back again across 8 seasons of documented fieldwork. The specific terrain of each investigation shapes what the team encounters and how it encounters it. The deep, hollow systems of the southern West Virginia coalfields produce a different class of experience from the ridge systems of the eastern counties, and the river drainage hollows of Pleasants County, where the team is based, produce different encounters again from the remote plateau country further south and east. The location of the investigation that Buck has never discussed until now is in West Virginia, not a distant location that required the production to travel to, not a region the team approached as outsiders, but home terrain. The specific hollow where the investigation took place is within the geographic range that the Ames team has been working across the full history of their operation, in country that Trapper knew from decades of hunting and that Willie McQuillian understood from a lifetime of working timber in the same drainage systems. That familiarity is significant context. The team did not encounter what this investigation produced because they were in unfamiliar territory operating without the local knowledge that their West Virginia roots give them in the areas they know best. They encountered it in the kind of terrain that their combined experience should have given them every advantage in. The hollow had been flagged in the team's research files for a period of time before the investigation was mounted, not as a primary target for a full investigation deployment, but as a location that kept producing witness accounts whose specific characteristics placed them in a category that the team's prior fieldwork had established as warranting direct investigation eventually. The accounts were consistent in a way that the team had learned to distinguish from the generalized strangeness reports that the mountain communities produce continuously, and that the investigation filters out from the accounts that indicate something specific enough to pursue. Something in that hollow had been producing consistent, specific, behaviorally detailed accounts for long enough that the team had moved it up the priority list and assigned Jeffro to compile a comprehensive research brief on the location's history before any field deployment was planned. Jeff Headley's role in the Ames team operation is the one that the show's format has consistently underserved relative to its actual importance. The investigation sessions that the cameras follow into the field are the visible portion of an operation whose invisible portion, the witness interviews, the historical research, the folklore documentation, and the pattern analysis that Jeffro assembles before any field deployment, determines the quality of what the field work produces. His antique and trading background, his deep familiarity with the material culture and oral history of West Virginia's river communities, and the decades he spent building relationships with the kind of rural informants who know things about the Appalachian backcountry that never enter any written record, give his research process a reach that no academic methodology could replicate. What Jeffro assembled on the hollow in question before the investigation was mounted is the foundation on which understanding what the team encountered there rests. The location's documented history extended back further than anyone on the team had anticipated when the initial accounts were flagged. The research brief that Jeffro produced connected the hollow to a pattern of reported activity in that drainage system that predated living memory. Accounts from the grandparents and great-grandparents of current community members that were consistent with the current witness reports in their behavioral descriptions without any mechanism for the kind of cultural transmission that would produce artificial consistency through repetition. The specific behaviors documented in the oldest accounts, the territorial marking, the structured vocalization patterns, the apparent awareness of human activity in the hollow at distances that should have been beyond detection, appeared in the current accounts without the community witnesses being aware of the prior documentation. That independence across temporal distance is the kind of evidential quality that Jeffro's research training recognizes immediately as significant. Something had been active in that hollow across a span of time that the witness record established as generational, not visiting, not passing through, resident. The research brief also surfaced something that shifted the tone of the team's pre-investigation discussions in a direction that Buck has described in his recent disclosures as unlike any prior planning session he participated in. Among the historical accounts Jeffro documented was a series of reports from timber workers who had operated in the hollow during the mid-20th century, workers whose professional experience in the West Virginia backcountry gave their assessments a credibility baseline that the research brief treated as significant. Several of those accounts described not a creature, but a presence, something in the hollow that did not produce consistent visual encounters, but that the workers independently and consistently described as felt rather than seen, something that the hollow knew about them before they knew about it. Willie McQuillian has built traps in the West Virginia backcountry for longer than most of the Ames team has been alive. His knowledge of the terrain, the timber, and the behavioral patterns of whatever the investigations are targeting gives his trap designs a functional sophistication that his materials, salvaged junkyard components, locally sourced timber, traditional fastening techniques learned from decades of working wood in the mountain environment, do not immediately communicate to anyone who has not seen what those traps can hold. He does not talk much about his process. He never has. His on-screen communication about what he is building and why tends toward the practical and the immediate rather than the reflective or the analytical. When Willie says something is different, it is because the materials or the terrain or the behavioral intelligence the trap needs to account for is presenting him with a problem that his accumulated experience has not previously solved. The trap construction for the hollow investigation was different from the first day of the build. Buck has described Willie's demeanor during the construction process as the quietest he had been across the entire period Buck had known him. And Buck has known Willie since before the show existed, since Trapper first brought the team together in the same West Virginia backcountry communities where all of them grew up. The quiet was not the ordinary focused silence of a craftsman working a complex problem. It was something that Buck recognized from the field, the specific kind of quiet that experienced outdoorsmen produce when the environment they are working in has communicated something to them that they are still processing. Willie had scouted the trap construction site in the hollow before the build began. What he encountered during that scouting visit has not been fully disclosed in Buck's recent account. What Buck has said about it is that Willie came back from the hollow that morning and sat in the truck for longer than usual before joining the team to begin the build, and that when he did join them, The first thing he said was that whatever they were building the trap to hold, the trap needed to be stronger than anything he had built before. The first night investigation in the Hollow produced evidence that the Ames team's most experienced members responded to with the kind of controlled professional attention that distinguishes a team whose collective fieldwork has given them a reference framework for what the Appalachian backcountry produces from a team that is encountering everything for the first time. Huckleberry positioned the team with the spatial awareness of a Marine who has spent decades applying military tactical thinking to backcountry investigation. Wild Bill read the terrain's approach corridors and wind patterns with the tracking instincts of a man who served 6 years in the Corps and spent the subsequent decades developing those instincts in civilian fieldwork across the full range of the West Virginia mountain system. The evidence that the cameras picked up in the Hollow that first night was not subtle. The thermal hits that the investigation's cameras logged at the tree line were consistent across multiple camera angles and consistent with something significantly larger than any known wildlife species whose range includes that section of the West Virginia backcountry. The vocalizations that the audio equipment captured were structured in a way that Wild Bill, whose tracking experience includes an extensive acoustic reference for every wildlife species active in this terrain, identified as outside the range of anything in his knowledge base. The physical evidence documented in the soft ground of the Hollow's creek drainage was extensive enough that Jeffro spent most of the first night's session documenting it rather than participating in the active investigation. The track density and the distribution pattern across the creek bank suggested to him that whatever was active in the Hollow was not alone and had been using the drainage as a regular travel corridor for an extended period. But the detail from the first night that Buck has emphasized most in his disclosures about the investigation is none of those things. It is the detail that the cameras documented and that none of the team discussed during the first night session or at the debrief that followed it. Wild Bill noticed it first. He said nothing about it until the team had returned to the vehicles and the cameras had stopped rolling. What he had noticed, and what every other member of the team confirmed they had also noticed without saying anything, was that from the moment they entered the Hollow until the moment they left it, not one of them had heard a single sound from any bird, insect, or small mammal in the surrounding forest. For the entire duration of the first night session, the biological community of that Hollow had gone completely and absolutely silent. The second night in the Hollow was when the investigation moved from the extraordinary into the territory that Buck has spent the years since the filming session deciding how to talk about. The trap Willie had built was positioned and tested. The team was deployed with the coverage that Huckleberry's tactical planning had designed for the approach corridors the first night's evidence had established as most active. The cameras were running across multiple positions with the overlapping coverage that the investigation's most significant field sessions required. Everything that the Ames team's accumulated operational experience had produced across 8 seasons of documented fieldwork was deployed in that Hollow on the second night. What happened during the first 2 hours of that session was consistent with the first night's evidence: thermal signatures at the tree line, vocalizations that the audio equipment captured at the infrasound boundary, physical disturbance in the creek drainage consistent with something moving through it at the opposite end of the Hollow from the team's position. The Hollow's biological silence was present again from the moment the team entered. Then the 2-hour mark passed and something changed in the character of what the Hollow was producing. Buck has described the change in terms that reflect the precision of a man who has spent his adult life developing the observational vocabulary to articulate what the Appalachian backcountry communicates to the people working in it. It was not a new sound. It was not a new thermal signature. It was a quality of attention that the Hollow directed at the team's position that had not been present during the first night or the first 2 hours of the second night. Something in that Hollow had made a decision. The shift from ambient presence to directed attention is a distinction that anyone who has spent serious time hunting in the West Virginia backcountry recognizes the moment it occurs. The moment when the relationship between the hunter and the terrain reverses, and the terrain begins hunting back. Every member of the Ames team felt it simultaneously. Nobody said anything, and then the cameras picked up what produced it. The sequence the Mountain Monsters cameras captured during the second night's investigation in the Hollow is the footage that the production reviewed and removed from the broadcast pipeline before any episode was assembled from the session material. Buck's account of what the cameras documented is the first public description of the contents of that footage from anyone connected to the production or the Ames team. He has been specific in his description in a way that reflects both his understanding that the footage exists and his awareness that his account needs to be consistent with what the cameras actually recorded. What the thermal cameras picked up at the 2-hour and 17-minute mark of the second night session was not one signature. It was several, distributed across the hollow in positions that Huckleberry's tactical assessment of the footage has subsequently identified as coordinated, not animals moving independently through shared territory. A deliberate arrangement of positions around the team's location that reflected an awareness of where every member of the Ames team was standing, what their coverage angles were, and where the gaps in that coverage were located. The positioning was tactical. That word is Huckleberry's. A retired Marine whose professional training was in exactly this kind of spatial awareness and coverage assessment looked at the distribution of thermal signatures in that hollow and used the word tactical to describe what he was looking at. The individual signatures that the cameras resolved at close range during the relevant sequence are what Buck has been most careful about in his disclosure, not because he is uncertain about what the cameras documented, but because he is aware of how the description sounds outside of the context of standing in that hollow at 2 in the morning with those cameras running and those signatures present. What he has said is that the dimensions were wrong, not larger than expected, wrong. The proportions visible in the thermal resolution at close range did not correspond to any biological reference that the team's collective decades of West Virginia backcountry experience had established, and the behavior of the signatures during the relevant sequence, the stillness, the patience, the quality of deliberate assessment that every member of the team present that night has independently described as the dominant characteristic of what the cameras documented, was the behavior of something that had done this before, many times, and had never once been documented doing it until those cameras caught it in that hollow on that specific night. The Mountain Monsters production reviewed the hollow investigation footage and made the determination to pull it from the broadcast pipeline before the episode was assembled. Buck's account of how that decision was communicated to the Ames team is one of the most revealing elements of his disclosure, because the manner of the communication tells a specific story about the level of the organizational structure at which the decision was made and the nature of the concerns that drove it. The team was not consulted. The footage review that produced the pull decision was conducted within the production without the Ames team's involvement, and the communication to the team was not a discussion or a collaborative editorial conversation. It was an instruction. Buck has described receiving that instruction with a directness that reflects both his personal response to being told that the most significant investigation the team had conducted was going to disappear into a production archive and his understanding of what the speed and the totality of the pull decision communicated about why it was made. Productions pull content for reasons that range from the legally cautious to the editorially considered. The Ames team has been associated with a show that has always operated at the edge of what its network was willing to broadcast. The series has never been shy about putting genuinely dangerous and genuinely anomalous content in front of its audience. The decision to pull this specific footage entirely, without any attempt to edit it into a broadcastable form, without any consultation with the team that produced it, and with an instruction to treat the investigation as though it had never occurred, is not consistent with any ordinary editorial concern. It is consistent with footage that everyone who reviewed it understood immediately could not be shaped into a form that the broadcast format could contain. Wild Bill, whose response to the pull decision Buck has described as the most direct of any team members, put it plainly in the private team discussion that followed. He said that whoever reviewed that footage and decided to pull it did so because they knew exactly what was in it, and they pulled it because they knew exactly what showing it would mean. Trapper built the Ames team around a simple conviction that what the Appalachian Mountains contained was real, was significant, and deserved to be pursued with the seriousness and the skill that the terrain and the subject demanded. He spent his life in those mountains. He led the team through investigations that took them to the edge of what any of them were prepared to encounter, and he never once suggested that the edge was a reason to stop. Buck inherited that conviction the way the youngest member of a team inherits everything the older ones built. Not through instruction, but through proximity, through watching someone do the thing they believed in with total commitment across every season of the show until the body that had carried him through a Vietnam combat deployment and 32 years of Union boilermaking work finally gave out. What Buck is revealing about the hollow investigation is the thing Trapper would have put on camera without hesitation. He would have sat in front of that footage and described every frame of it and let the audience make of it what they would. That is what the show was always supposed to be. The investigation nobody was allowed to see produced the most significant evidence the Ames team has ever gathered in those mountains. The footage exists. The team knows what it shows. And Jacob Lowe, Buck, has decided that the silence Trapper would never have maintained is a silence he is no longer willing to maintain on Trapper's behalf. Whatever came out of that hollow on the second night and arranged itself around the team's position in the dark is still in those mountains. It was there before the Ames team was formed. It will be there long after the last camera is packed away. Buck just made sure it can no longer be there alone.